So the League has a tradition of bringing top-notch speakers in to address our AGM. Some of you will remember that Ken Greenberg was our speaker last year, and we've had a lot of really great people. We're thrilled this year to present our featured speaker for the evening, who is Mr. Ben Gomberg. For the uninitiated, Ben is well known to some people in the room. He grew up in Montreal. He's a landscape architect and urban planner by training. I think he spent some time at the Ivy Business School as well, but for our purposes, he was a planner in the City of London. Right here in the City of London, he was a planner. And at that point, I think it was quite clear he was the de facto biking coordinator for the city. And this was in the early to mid 90s. You'll have to correct the dates when you're doing your thing. And then he was headhunted away and went to the city of Chicago, where he spent 17 years as a biking coordinator for that city, 10 times the size of London, which has, I've read, the largest and best bike program in the US. Now, I don't know whether that's true. I loved the city. I never rode a bike when I was there. But as active transportation goes, this guy is a rock star. So during his time in the city of Chicago, he installed 12,000 bike racks. He educated thousands of people each year through Chicago's Bike Ambassador program. Oversaw the construction of hundreds of miles of bike paths and coordinated the new Divvy Bike Share program, which I believe I just read somewhere, just had its 3 millionth user. So we've talked about how his career started right here in London. Lots of us in the room are cyclists. If you've ever pulled out the bike map, Ben Gomberg. If you ever, well, not Ben Gomberg by himself, but largely responsible, or mostly responsible. If you've cycled through the Greg Kernot Tunnel, Ben Gomberg. No? Well, of course, everything is a partnership. Greg Kernot Tunnel won, actually, I think, a Green Brick Award from the League around the time it was built. Early bicycle signage, all these things happened, and at the end of it, we've made progress on that since then. But a lot of this stuff started during Ben's tenure here in London. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say tonight. So let's give him a warm round of applause as a welcome back to London.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's been too long. Like Greg was saying, obviously I was here for about 10 years in the planning division, and the last couple of years decided that maybe Chicago, or London I should say, needed a bike map. So let's start with the first slide and talk about how things happen. Didn't think that it would be too much trouble, didn't think it would be too much money, didn't think it would be too hard, and it took a lot of time, a lot of money, and but we got a map going, and this was through a group that we called Map Makers through the Thames Region Ecological Association. I think Diane Zoller's here. You here somewhere? Diane couldn't have happened without her and about 100 other volunteers that either got the money, raised the money, or, as you see in the slide, top left of the slide, we actually identified the streets for the first time that as cyclists we thought were good streets for cycling. So I went back to council. I should say it had about a $22,000 budget, and out of that budget, the City of London contributed $1,700. Okay? Some of it was through advertising. I say that in a positive way. I don't say that in any critical way. The LTC contributed some money. What was then PUC contributed some money. We had foundation support. But I went back to city to thank them for their contribution. And the city engineer at the time, I believe it was John Jardine, said, look, and I was fed up. And I just spent what I thought was going to be a month or two, became 12 months. He said, listen, if you want to, we'll give you half the money to sign those streets. I said, come on, give me a break. But it was just too good. So we ended up finding matching funding, and we put those signs that are still up, I notice, about 150 of them, just actually now taking it off a piece of paper, off a map, and on the street, identifying the direction and the destination. Okay? Now I said, well, I guess I'm in it for good, so start work on some other projects. Let's look at the next slide. I went to the London Downtown Business Association. Said, look, you guys want people to come to your businesses. A real good way is through bike parking. And we did a partnership where I helped them find the design, essentially the post and ring bike rack design in Toronto, and they paid for construction. And I guess the heading is partnerships. The heading is working together, which is what we all do here at the Urban League and in our work together. I think there's 8 or 9 project partners, ranging from the Lung Association, the Academy of Medicine. I went by the old public library today, you know, where they put together a book list on books on bicycling, you know. And probably as interesting is that there was funding from all different places. And I guess that's a lesson that I learned, and one that I'm very proud of, that you can get projects accomplished. You can get things done when there's not much money necessarily to be seen, but things can happen when you work together in partnership, work together, the community with the city, and the overall business community. So the last project, in the next slide, was the tunnel. At that point, we've been doing so much work, these and other projects. There was such a buzz about cycling. There was such a excitement that things were happening that when a Jobs Ontario grant, and by the way, can everyone hear me? Am I talking too loud or too low? A little quieter? A little louder, okay. Thank you for telling me. And if I'm talking too loud, you tell me that I should shut up, okay? But in any event, you know, it was a grant opportunity came up with the province jobs grant, and we were well positioned. There was such enthusiasm in the community. We had established some, we being volunteers, had established a lot of credibility, and we were able to make the Colonel Tunnel as the city's project, because the city could only pick one project. Then we went to work, and we just rallied support. It's been 18 years, so I'm going to now tell you the dirty, dark secret on who wrote the support letters and how they were done, okay? That said, I guess the doors are still closed, right? It's all among ourselves. We had just gotten Word Perfect at the City Hall, so that's how many years ago it was. And I was just learning how to use, use it. So I said, okay, well, can't do it during the day because I'm a senior planner in the planning division, but I know how to get in the building. So and it's 18 years, I figured okay, well, I can always go to City Hall on nights and weekends. They don't mind me being the unofficial bike coordinator because I'm unofficial means that they're not paying me, right? And I went to my desk and I wrote 30 letters from, I think, South Forks Community Group. I have the Y and Police Department and every group that we've been involved with in all these bike projects. And I said, gee, I think these computers now can change fonts. So I said, okay, well, let me give the Y an italic font. Let me give the Police Department a 12-point Helvetica and this and that. There was no such thing as email. But and then I said to them, okay, well, will you sign the letter? And I changed it a little bit beside the font I have. And, I'm joking a little bit, but the people signed on because we had worked together. And we got, I believe, a $2 million grant from the province, which the city matched, by the way, with about $700,000. And that was the result. Okay? So with that said, I went to a conference, and Diane was mentioning that she had just come back from Portland. I went to a conference in Portland and was talking about all these amazing projects that we were doing in London, how to forge successful partnerships and this and that. And a couple months after I come back to London, somebody was at the conference says, you know, calling from Chicago, remember we partied? I said, no, I never. Believe me, we didn't party. But we'd had maybe a Coca-Cola or two together. And he says, I promise you, apply for the job. I'll help get the job. I'm on the Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Council. I said, that's great. I'm making a really good salary. He says, I'll find you a wife. I'll find you a wife. So it didn't take me long to tell Randy Neufeld, my good friend, still my good friend, that it sounds like a good deal. So I moved down to Chicago, and let's now talk about Chicago. Here's this London boy in a city of 350,000, now in a city of 3 million people. A little bit different, be living in the States and living in Canada. We can talk about that some other time. Now I'm in charge of a program which has no staff, no money, and no plan. Does that sound familiar? Okay, so I'm going to talk about 5 or 6 projects I did in next slides. Then I'm going to talk about why I think they worked and how they can apply here. And then talk about some specific strategies that can be done in the next 12 or 18 months to make things happen here in town, okay? What I don't want to do is come as a so-called American expert, because I'm not, first of all, as far as I'm concerned, American. Second, I don't want to come from a city that's so much larger and say that this is the template for London, but I do think there are some things to be learned that I'd like to share. First of all, obviously there's bike lanes on the city streets, some accommodation for cyclists on the city streets. What we're seeing now in Chicago and in other large cities in the States, and I think Toronto and Vancouver, Montreal certainly, is to have some more protection for the cyclists. So if you see on the far left, and I hope I'm talking loud enough. If I'm not, let me know, because it's kind of hard to... Everything okay? Okay. On the left is what we'll call a buffered bike lane, which gives a little bit more protection between the motorist, the cyclist, or the cyclist and the parked car. Doors opening, and on the right is something where there's more space, which actually provides kind of like a bike path on the street that's physically separated with flex posts or bollards or striping or whatever. And I'll get into it in a bit, we have about 60 miles, which I guess would be about 100 kilometers of those two type of what I'll call protected bike lanes installed within the last 3 years, which is probably the most of any American city. And by and large, they're pretty successful, especially the ones on the right, which people kind of breathe a sigh of relief when they get on them and they say, oh man, I'm not going to get killed, I'm not going to wiped out. I perceive that it's safe, okay? And it's just very exciting. It's very exciting, different design for versus what I'll call traditional bike lanes. So that's one initiative that's been successful and may have some interest here. Second, success is you're not going to see because we don't have internet access, so I'll move to the next slide, please. Our bike share, which was kind of fun because I had to be on an evaluation committee and decide whether or not, again, doors are closed, the Montreal's Bixby system was the best bike vendor around or not, and I'm happy to say that I felt it was, and as did the committee. So, especially since I was born and raised in Montreal, we picked the Bixby. City purchased 3,000 bikes, 300 terminals. We have an order in for another 100, which will make it the largest or the second largest system in the U.S. What it does? Do people know anything about bike sharing, or not? Who doesn't know? So you all know about bike sharing, okay? So I would only say that it's a real convenient way for cyclists and non-cyclists to do trips, one-way trips, or short trips in conjunction with transit. You'll notice at the bottom right slide, that person in the front is our new mayor, Rahm Emanuel, who's very much a supporter of it. Next slide, please. Our previous mayor, Mayor Daley, otherwise known as Mayor Daley II, wanted, when they were building Millennium Park. Has anyone been to Chicago? People been to Millennium Park? One of the things he wanted featured was a bike parking station, a place where people could, bike to, leave their bike somewhere that was secure, take a shower, and then, cross the street or 2-3 blocks later go to work in some, suit or tie or something like that. So this is the one that we have in Chicago. Frankly, I don't think it's a good investment. I think that you have in any public situation, you have to consider what you're going to get, what bang for the buck you're going to get. And to spend $3-4 million to have 300 parking spaces, I think that metric or that return is not one that I personally would recommend. But I include it because sometimes people do think of projects that they think would attract cyclists or would be worth having. And I think we have to be very careful, very mindful, very judicious in what you spend your money on to the best effect. Next slide, please. Our lakefront trail is very popular, so much so that we're actually doing a flyover over 2 streets near Navy Pier, where there's a lot of congestion. And that visual is in the bottom right slide. Next slide, which is kind of fun because there's an abandoned rail line, and I don't think there's too many abandoned rail lines here. There are quite a few in Chicago because it's the rail capital of America at one point. Many of them abandoned. This one actually is a CN rail line, of all things, which you can see is now entirely derelict. It happens to go through 4 neighborhoods in Chicago where there's really not much open space, hardly any open space, let alone trail use or pathways in there. I'm sorry that the graphic on the bottom isn't clear, but it shows the reconstruction of that trail, which is happening right now. So next time you're in Chicago, bring your bikes and go along the Bloomingdale Trail. Next slide talks about how our street policy now is to include and consider cycling, walking, transit, people with disabilities, freight, and so forth, that all needs are considered in roadway projects and not just those of the single occupancy motor vehicle. Next slide. Now, this is where it gets fun. Okay? I mentioned in an earlier session today. All those pictures are good. The story about me getting married, by the way, I did get married. He didn't have anything to do with it, by the way. Although, interestingly enough, my wife, of all things, lived across the street from him. So all these years he's telling me he's looking across the world, and goodness, the woman I married that he was going to promise to find lived 2 or 3 doors away. But anyways, back on topic. The only 3 slides, in my opinion, that count are the next 3 slides. Okay? They tell you why it happened in Chicago, why it can happen and did happen in London, why it doesn't happen in some cities or happens a little bit more in others. I think there's really 3 components. Right? And by the way, this isn't for bike projects, but for any meaningful change, in my opinion. First of all, you have to have community involvement. And you know that, being involved with the Urban League. And particularly in Chicago, there's a advocacy group that's very strong, well-funded, and very savvy, called the Active Transportation Alliance, with 6,000 members and 6 or 7-digit income each year. So they're already there advocating, and they're part of a process, and they're working within the system and sometimes outside the system to make things happen. So for example, and we'll move to the next slide. In 2011, when there was a municipal election coming up, they went to all the aspiring mayoral candidates and talked to them about bicycling. They told me that they figured that was a pretty good time to talk to a politician, where they'll listen to you and be available. And they went to one of them, Rahm Emanuel, and he got very excited about what they were talking about, to the extent that he said before he was elected, if you remember that trail we were talking about, that abandoned rail line, he said, I'm going to have that built within my first term. $60 million project. And you may recall I said it's under construction now and will be open next year before his first term ends. What I point out, and with no disrespect to a phenomenal mayor, is he didn't even know where that trail was. Okay? At the press conference when he said his commitment to do that, he didn't even know that it was 2 blocks away. But he did know that he was trying to get elected, that there was a constituency out there that he wanted to have as support. There was a constituency out there that was meeting with him, and there was a constituency out there that also got him to do a commitment to put in 160 miles of protected bike lanes in 4 years. So that's why I started with the community leadership. Once the political leadership was there, we will go on to the third and last slide, which is for staff leadership. Mayor Emanuel, at least in the States, when a new mayor comes in, they sweep out the administration, senior managers, and they appoint their own, and he appointed a new commissioner for the transportation department. Now, what do you think that person's job description was? He had to put in 160 kilometers of protected bike lanes. He had to put in this elevated bike path, and he had to put in our Bixie program. So a department with 1,000 people, I was probably, in terms of various commissioners' interests over the 17 years I was there, for 15 years I may have been at 999, maybe in a good year. They might have remembered my name once. Now all of a sudden, I'm the guy in the whole Department of Transportation, because the guy that just got hired to run the Department of Transportation, the leader of the department, is telling me that if I don't do these bike lanes, he's going to get fired and sent back to Washington, D.C., where he came from. So I'm making some fun of it, but the whole dynamic changed when you have those 2 planks happening, that someone was hired to do the work, in this case, the bicycle work. And the work that was done, it was absolutely incredible, the change overnight, how things happen so fast and so well. So with that, I'll finish the London Part 1, Chicago, in terms of London being the partnerships we developed, Chicago being the involvement of the community, involvement of the politicians, which are not necessarily at the mayoral level. They can be obviously at the council level as well. And then the component of allies and working together with city staff. Now, this is the part you've all been waiting for. So what would I do? Not really what I would do. What are some strategies that you might want to think about, okay, for the next 12 to 18 months? So we'll move to the next slide. First, I think it's worth considering establishing a neighborhood bikeway. And the example I would give is when I was studying at Western, I lived at Oxford and Richmond on Helmuth, and I biked to school. And I could have biked on Richmond, just gone way up Richmond to get to the campus. I biked on Wellington to Huron, turned left, and then snuck through the bridge, and I'm sorry, it might be Sunset, if I'm forgetting the last name. That was my route. Yeah. If I'd ridden on Richmond, I probably would have been passed by 60 cars during that ride. When I rode on Wellington past the hospital and so forth, past Huron, I was passed by 8 cars. Those numbers are valid numbers as of this year, okay? So to me, it's not rocket science. That if you're going to do a bikeway facility, try and do it on a street that has low traffic volumes in the neighborhood. As long as there is traffic control, meaning stop signs or red lights where necessary. And that's what a neighborhood bikeway could be. I think you may want to consider establishing a trial one here and see how it works and whether it attracts the people that aren't bicycling but might. Let's go to the second one, which is a way to pick up space for a bike lane or streetscape or widen sidewalks by putting a road on a diet. Fancy term of saying that sometimes you don't need 2 lanes of traffic in each direction, and you can do a center turn lane or something like that. So this is more engineering design stuff, but I guess the point I'm making is that there's always, and I can tell you my experience in Chicago, there's a lot of streets that are too wide, and there's ways to re-engineer those streets to put in bike facilities at virtually no cost. Strategy 3, next slide please, is that as far as planning, transportation planning, as far as engineering, as far as an approach to our streets, that these streets should be considered for all users of all abilities, and that would be through a complete streets policy, much like you saw on a previous slide. We now have that in Chicago and about 250 other cities in the States. Next slide, please. This is one that I'm pretty passionate about, and I'm just planting a seed. If anyone wants to talk about it more afterwards, I'd be delighted to take questions on it. The pathway along the river is fantastic. I mean, it's a jewel. And I think riding it again after too many years, you just realize, we know it's there, but it's a wonderful trail. And it's kind of like a jewel, and there's ways to make that jewel a little bit better, maybe by improving the access points, more signage that people that live nearby might know that, hey, there's a trail down there that we can take our kids on, or better routes to it, whatever. There's a whole toolkit of things I can talk about, but you almost have a spine of a network of good bike routes with the parkway, in my opinion. Next slide, please. I'm not going to talk too much about this except to say that we talk about engineering for biking, but we should also be talking about education for cyclists, children, other road drivers. And we should also be talking about encouragement programs. These are 2 that might be worth considering because I think there are 2 good models, successful models elsewhere. Let's move to the next one. This one is very timely, of course. I'm thrilled to hear that the Bicycling Advisory Committee has been being reestablished. It really seems like there's an excitement and support and understanding in the city administration, both in the planning department and energy in terms of the engineering. I mean, it's really very, very clear to me that the city has a commitment to and an understanding and support for this, and so it's very timely that the Bicycle Advisory Committee is reestablishing. With that said, I think it's important to have some training so that people know what can be done, what can't be done, what costs, what doesn't cost, and have the members all have a sort of some same sense of what they want to accomplish. Otherwise, things may not be accomplished as much as we'd like. So that's why that one gets a full slide. Let's move on to the other one. I said you only have to remember 3 slides, so prevail upon me to remember 1 more, okay? We did a survey in Chicago asking people that bicycled why they bicycled. Right? Kind of basic question, isn't it? And I was absolutely amazed at the reasons that, and I'm sorry that the slide isn't that clear because of the light. I was absolutely amazed at the results. 2/3 of the people in this survey, which by the way is similar to results in other surveys in other cities, were biking because they enjoy it. In this case, that's the bottom pie piece of 27%, or the larger one because of exercise, health, or fitness. Okay? 2/3 of the people are riding because they like it and they want to get exercise. As for how many people are riding because they want to reduce congestion, it's good for the environment, it saves energy, That was 8%. So I would suggest that the intrinsic rewards are what people are interested in. The whole positioning bicycling that it's going to save the world, which it may well or may not, is not good marketing. What you have to do is address and deal with the people, what they want, which is clearly an opportunity to have some exercise and have fun, and that's what trails provide, more so than bike lanes, in my opinion. I would therefore suggest that the city, before spending any meaningful amount of money, or any money, any bit of money, just do a similar survey. And don't count on Chicago results, but find out, why are people cycling? And maybe better question, which we didn't ask in my survey years ago, is why are people not bicycling? And not rely on what we think might be the case or might not be the case, but in a statistical way find out why people are bicycling or not bicycling. And once you have that information, you can design your programs. You know, I was driving in the car, I'm sorry, I have to admit it, down the street, and I went to I passed Kellogg's down the road. Now, I can tell you, when they're selling their cereal, they know who they're selling it to. They have the market information as to the age, the demographic, the income, what were the key things that they want. And I think after doing this for 20 years, we really don't have that. A lot of times we have assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions are correct, and sometimes they may not be. So I suggest that conducting a survey of some sort to find out really what the needs are here. Next slide, please. There's a lot of them. I'll just maybe talk about number 11 and 15, which are passionate to me, that you have to have the money, obviously, to get your projects done. We were able to do that years ago with a lot of partnerships, like I explained. I think that what some cities are doing, and 15 is recommended in the city of Dallas's bike plan, is actually establishing a fundraising task force. In other words, they're getting down there. I'm recommending that you figure out what the needs are, what the priority projects are, draft some grant applications so that when the provincial government, before the next election, or the federal government, I should say, all of a sudden has all these grant opportunities or money flowing just the last minute, which at least is the Chicago way. I won't say that that's the way it's in Canada. The grants are there. The work's been done. You're third base in terms of hopefully getting the funding that's available in these one-time operations. That's what we did with the Colonel Tunnel. We had everything lined up, and I think it would be a good idea to do something similar, so that to capitalize on various sources of funding. So with that, I'll close with the final slide. The old, tug at your heartstrings, the children who, I remember as a kid biking to school. I remember biking to high school. And I'm not sure these are my kids, by the way, that I'm too comfortable with them biking on the streets. Whose kids are you going to find? These are my kids, right? Just started to ride, and I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified biking with them in my neighborhood. And I'd really like to have a situation where I can get them biking to school, like I did and a lot of us did many years ago. And that's the type of city I hope we'll have in Chicago. I certainly hope it's something that we'll work on in other cities as well, maybe here as well. Okay? So thank you.